Part 30. Fortunate Young Gentleman. Author, Rong Xiao Rong. Chapter 292. Tang Ning felt helpless when meeting such a boss. Zhao Yingying was not punishing him for accompanying the 6th Inspection Department, but she was clearly punishing him for going out with her. Although she didn't know whether Chen Huang had a fever or forgot to take medicine, why she let her out, but under the order of the Minister of the Ministry of Revenue, he can't help but listen. Sleep with Suhuhu and play with Zhao Yingying. One is a god sister and the other is a real princess. You cannot refuse these two things. In life, you can't help yourself. The group of people left the Ministry of Revenue. Han Ming stood in the courtyard of the Ministry of Revenue, looked at Qian Shangshu, and asked, "Sir, the Duzi Yamen is busy, how can you still approve the leave for Mr. Tang?" "What can I do?" Qianshuo shrugged and said, "It is better to let the princess ruin the head of Tang than to ruin our household department." Han Ming was stunned, spoiled. Slip of the tongue, Qianshuo waved his hand and said, "The princess finally left the palace once, so let Chief Tang accompany her." After leaving the Hubyu Yamen, Zhao Man never mentioned the inspection of the 6th department again. Instead, I asked Tang Ning what delicious food and fun things there were in the capital. He walked through the city with a large group of guards, like a country bumpkin who got rich overnight, holding a candied horse in his left hand and a candy man in his right hand. He handed it to Tang Ning and said, "Hold it for me for a while." Tang Ning casually handed the candy figures that the master had drawn on the table to the guards behind her. Last time she went shopping with Xiao Yi and the others, she took a few candy figures in her hand, which attracted a swarm of bees. His fingers were all swollen from the sting, and he stopped touching it from then on. "Wow, what is painted on this umbrella is the meeting between White Snake and Su Xian on the broken bridge." Zhao Man held an umbrella in her hand, excitedly, waving her hand. "Bought it? Wow, these are the Bai sword and Qinghong sword of White Snake and Green Snake. I want them too. Hey, this is the lotus lantern of the 3 holy mothers, I want it too." Tang Ning looked at the guard who was about to pay, waved his hand and said, "Okay, you can just take these things without paying." Zhao Man looked at him and asked doubtfully, "Why?" Tang Ning said generously, "This shop is run by my family. Princess, take whatever you like and treat it as a gift from me. They are all small items, not worth much. They are given to Zhao Yingying as a convenient favor. Maybe next time she wants to torment him, she will feel a little guilty when she thinks of these gifts. It turns out this is owned by your family." Zhao Man was surprised and said, "Well, let me get a few more." She pointed and said, this one, and this one." Tang Ning picked up a bracelet, a jade hairpin, and a sachet, and asked, "Are these 3 pieces?" Zhao Man waved her hand and said, "I don't want these 3 items, but I want all the others." Tang Ning walked behind Zhao Man with a stern face. She shouldn't have said anything just now. If she took away the entire store, Tang Yaoyao would definitely demolish it when she went back today. These stores are their common property. Tang Ning can't make the decision on major matters by herself. Although she only allowed her to take advantage of 10 items in the end, if Tang Yaoyao asked, he still had to find a convincing reason. Zhao Man licked the candy man with her small tongue, pointed to the front, and said loudly, "What are you doing in front? Go and take a look." Tang Ning looked at a juggler on the street in front of them, then followed them. After watching the sideshow, a child held a gong and walked past the crowd. Zhao Man threw a piece of silver and knocked the gong out of the child's hand. The child did not even bother to pick it up and scatter it. Picking up the silver coins lying on the ground, he put his head in and bowed, "Thank you, madam, thank you, madam. Madam is compassionate and kind. I wish madam and master to have a son soon and grow old together." Zhao Man looked back and asked in surprise, "Where is madam?" After a while, Zhao Man walked out of the crowd with a red face, looked at the expressionless Tang Ning, stepped on him hard, and said angrily, "Why don't you explain?" Tang Ning dodged her fatal stomp and said, "This kind of thing is getting darker and darker with each passing day. It's not true anyway, so why do we need to explain?" Zhao Man was still a little angry and asked, "Does this princess look like she is of marrying age?" Tang Ning nodded and said, "My wife married me when she was the same age as a princess." "You," Zhao Man looked at him and gritted his teeth, "you think this princess can't get married, right? Let me tell you, people who want to marry this princess can line up from the city gate to the palace gate." Tang Ning didn't want to expose her. These days, no one with a little bit of ability would want to marry a princess. Although Chen Guo's prince-in-law was not that cowardly, marrying a princess would not mean the end of his official career. However, due to the influence of the previous dynasty, the big families in Beijing had no intention of marrying a princess. This is still somewhat contradictory. What's more, marrying a princess is not the same as marrying a wife. It means bringing back an ancestor, a princess who whispers in your ears all day long. Tang Ning patted her chest. People with families don't have to worry about this. He glanced at Zhao Man, stopped continuing the topic, and asked, "Where does the princess want to go now?" Zhao Man thought for a while, rubbed his stomach and said, "I'm a little hungry, let's go eat." Tang Ning looked at it and said, "There is a restaurant in front of you." Zhao Man shook her head and said, "I heard that the food in Tianashanju in the capital is the most delicious. I haven't eaten it yet. It's hard to get out of here. Let's go to Tianashanju." "It's just a meal, how come there are so many requirements? If you go to Tianashanju, you don't know what kind of trouble you will get into." Tang Ning thought for a while and said, "The food at Tianashanju is nothing more than that. I know there is a restaurant that has good food. Otherwise we—" Zhao Man looked at him and smiled, "You said you wouldn't go, but I insist on going." Tang Ning thought for a moment and said, "I think it would be better to go to Tianashanju." Zhao Man smiled and said, "Then I'll listen to you." Tang Ning found that he still underestimated Zhao Yingying's tricks. When she was stupid, and when she was smart, she had various tricks one after another. He took her to Tianashanju and booked the best accord. Zhao Yingying, because of her high status, no one could eat at the same table with her, but Tang Ning didn't want to wait outside like the other guards, so while she was eating, she went to Su Mei's courtyard. Su Mei looked at him and asked in surprise, "Why are you here at this time?" She was not the only one in Su Mei's room. There was also the old woman Tang Ning had seen last time. Tang Ning had already stepped into the door, then stepped back and said, "I'll go to the back, you continue." He walked around to the backyard, stepped on a stone in the corner, and used the force to fly over the wall. "I've seen the young master." When the two women in the courtyard saw him, they immediately bowed and saluted. Su Hu's ability to train people is second to none, and the two of them are now very obedient. Tang Yu walked out of the room and saw him with a smile on her face and said, "The weather is getting colder. Mayor gave me some sable furs. I'm just idle here. Before it snows, I can give him some sable furs, make some fur coats." She was agitated by Zhao Yingying outside just now. After arriving in the courtyard, her mood calmed down. Tang Ning walked up and said, "Thank you, mother." "What does the family say to say thank you?" Tang Yu smiled and said, "You sit here for a while. I made some cakes this morning and gave them to you to try." Tang Ning was eating cakes, and Tang Yu sat opposite him and murmured, "I haven't seen Shui for a long time, and I don't know how she has been doing these days." Tang Ning took a sip of water and said, "I will bring her to see you in a few days." Tang Yu shook her head and said, "Forget it." Tang Ning knew what she was worried about. She thought about it and said, "Don't worry, I will find a way." He sat there for more than a quarter of an hour before a maid came forward and said, "Master, Miss Su wants you to go out." Tang Ning climbed over the courtyard wall and saw Su Mei waiting for him in the courtyard. He looked at Sumei and asked, "What's wrong?" Sumei glanced at him and asked, "Did you bring the people outside? What's going on outside?" Tang Ning just started to speak. After she realized what she was doing, she quickly walked to the front yard. In the small courtyard, Zhao Man stood in the courtyard, with a green snake coiled on her shoulder, spitting out a snake message to her. "Go, go away." Her face turned pale and there was a cry in her voice. In the courtyard, several guards were at war with each other. On the other side, an old man in grey clothes was confronting the old woman, and the atmosphere was extremely tense. Tang Ning stepped forward quickly, pinched the green snake, and threw it to Xiao Tao, who was standing aside to watch the excitement. Zhao Man jumped up almost instantly, holding his hands around his neck like a koala. On his body, he trembled. "Snake, there is a snake." Fortunate young gentleman. Author, Rong Xiao Rong. Chapter 293. The snake has run away, you come down first and talk. Zhao Man hung on his shoulder in a very shameful posture. Tang Ning could not move around and could only pat her shoulder. Zhao Man pointed at Xiao Tao and said, "No, it's still in her hand." Xiao Tao touched the green snake's head and looked at Tang Ning with dissatisfaction, as if she was blaming him for his violent behavior just now. Tang Ning glanced at her and said, "Xiao Tao, take Xiao Qing in first." Although Xiao Tao was unwilling, she still walked into the inner room. Tang Ning patted Zhao Man's shoulder again and said, "Can you come down now?" Zhao Man jumped off him, her face still a little pale. Tang Ning looked at her and asked, "Why did she scare you with a snake?" Zhao Man said aggrievedly, "I wanted to play her sepak takraw ball, but she wouldn't let me play." As soon as she opened her mouth, Tang Ning knew what had just happened. Who is Zhao Yingying? She is a spoiled little princess. She has clothes on her back, food on her hands, and food on her hands. She gets what she wants. But that girl Xiao Tao is stubborn and has a donkey temper. Maybe it's because of Zhao Man's bad attitude. The two people had a conflict because of this. Xiao Tao didn't know her role as a princess, and then she suffered a loss. If he hadn't known that her Xiaoqing was not poisonous, he wouldn't have been able to fight her. Tang Ning looked at the guards and said to Zhao Man, "It's just a misunderstanding. Let them go out first." Thinking of the scene where Tang Ning caught the snake with her bare hands, Zhao Man clapped her mouth and said, "Then you have to protect me and don't let her let the snake bite me." Tang Ning nodded and said, "Don't worry, her snake won't bite." Zhao Man waved away the guards, but the old man in grey remained, standing quietly behind her. Tang Ning knew that this was probably a master in the palace and would not leave her side. Su Mei walked over from the front and asked, "This is your sister?" Perhaps it was a woman's natural stress response to the same kind. When Su Mei came over, Zhao Man stood up first. After Su Mei walked in, human self-knowledge made her lower her head. Tang Ning looked at Zhao Man and introduced Su Mei, "This is Princess Ping Yang." Su Mei raised her eyebrows slightly, "Princess Ping Yang." Tang Ning explained, "The tiger falls in Pingyang and is bullied by dogs." Zhao Man glared at him and gritted his teeth and said, "You are the dog." Su Mei was surprised for a moment, then looked at Zhao Man, bowed slightly and said, "I have met Princess Pingyang." Tang Ning looked at her again and introduced to Zhao Man, "This is Miss Su Mai Su." Su Mei. Zhao Man was surprised and blurted out, "You are the most beautiful woman in the capital." Su Mei smiled slightly and said, "It's all false praise from outsiders, it can't be taken seriously." Zhao Man nodded and said, "I think so too." The smile on Su Mei's face froze. Tang Ning rubbed her eyebrows and walked towards the room while saying, "Xiao Tao, lend me your little green to play with." Su Mei's smile stopped for a moment, then quickly recovered, and she said with a smile, "I have heard about Princess Pingyang for a long time, but now that I see her, she is indeed well deserved." Zhao Man asked curiously, what is being said about me outside? Su Mei smiled slightly and said, Princess Pingyang is said to be beautiful, smart, and serving the country and the people. She is willing to trade her own happiness for the peace of the two countries. She is worthy of admiration. When she heard that she was beautiful and smart, Zhao Man had a smile on her face, but when she heard the second half of the sentence, she was startled and asked, why do we trade our own happiness for the peace of the two countries? Didn't you say that for the sake of the peace of the grassland and the Chen kingdom, the princess is going to the grassland to get married? Su Mei looked at her and asked in surprise, isn't that the case? Zhao Man was a little anxious, who said I was going to the grassland to get married? Su Mei said doubtfully, everyone says so. Don't you know, princess? It is said that there are already several imperial censors and ministers in the court who are preparing to jointly submit a report. They are about to report this matter to your majesty. Zhao Man's face suddenly turned pale. When Tang Ning came out of Su Mei's room, Zhao Man had disappeared. He looked at Su Mei and said in surprise, where's the princess? Su Mei glanced in the direction of the door and said, I'm going back to the palace. Xiao Tao slipped out of the room, clapped her mouth, and looked scared, she's gone. Although Tang Ning didn't know what happened, she could probably guess it. How could a big spirit or a little monster with only 10 years of training be able to defeat a vixen who had practiced for thousands of years? He had already experienced Su Mei's verbal skills many times. After leaving Tianranju, it was almost time to go to the lower office, so Tang Ning simply went home. It's been a while since I've seen Tang Shui. It's not a good idea to hastily invite her to Tianranju. If it attracts the attention of someone interested, the position will have to be relocated. But you can't bring people out directly from Tianzhu. Once they are recognized, the trouble will be even greater. He hadn't thought of a perfect solution to this matter yet, so he put it down for now. He walked to the courtyard wall and climbed over it skillfully. Today, I used the two people's common property to give Zhao Man a favor. I still need to explain to Tang Yeji. It is one thing for him to take the initiative to explain, but it is another thing when Tang Yeji asks. Tang Ning walked to the door of Tang Fairy's room, knocked on the door, and walked in. A figure sat in front of Tang Yao Yao's dressing table, but it didn't look like her. Her legs were longer and her waist was slimmer. Tang Ning walked into the room and asked, Xiu'er, what are you doing? The figure turned around. Tang Ning stopped in her tracks and asked in surprise, who are you and why are you here? The woman looked at him and said doubtfully, I am Xiu'er, Mr. Tang, don't you recognize me? Stop lying to me. Tang Ning walked over and said cautiously, what did you do to Xiu'er? I'm really Xiu'er. The shadow stood up and said, I just changed my clothes. Just wait a moment. She walked to the copper basin, washed her face, and wiped it again, only to reveal a face that was familiar to Tang Ning. Tang Ning sighed, your makeup skills are really superb. Xiu'er said proudly, of course, when I helped you disguise yourself as a woman, no one noticed. There's no need to mention this matter. Tang Ning waved her hand, and suddenly seemed to remember something, and asked, Xiu'er, can you transform one person into another so that no one can recognize her? Xiu'er looked at him and asked, didn't you just see that? Tang Ning was stunned for a moment, then looked at her again and said, Xiu'er, you are so beautiful. Household Department. I have been out of office for a quarter of an hour, but no official has left the office yet. Everywhere in the room, the crackling sound caused by turning the abacus is endless. Although the speed and efficiency of their liquidation have been greatly improved after the training of Director Tang, no one dares to relax just in case. A scribe inspected various rooms, walked into the courtyard, saw a figure, and immediately ran over, bowing and saying, I've seen Mr. Fang. Fang Zhe looked at him and asked, how is the accounting going? The scribe immediately said, Sir, everything is going well. Fang Zhe walked around the check-in rooms, and when he came to the last empty check-in room, he asked, "Mr. Tang has gone back?" The clerk said, "At noon, the princess came down to inspect the household department." Master Shangshu ordered Mr. Tang to accompany the princess to inspect the various ministries. Fang Zhe glanced across the table casually and picked up a piece of paper with a strange form on it. Fang Zhe picked up a few more pieces of paper, looked at the dense red circles on the paper, and asked, "What is this?" The clerk explained, "This is the position of the head of the Tang dynasty." "I don't know what it is." Fang Zhe nodded, and after looking at it for a few times, he put down the papers and walked out. The little official walked out of the door and bowed, "Master Fang, please go slowly." After Fang Zhe walked out of Duzi Yamen, he sighed and shook his head slightly. Although Mr. Fang was famous, it was too late for him to come to the Ministry of Finance. Once Wei Shilang left, except for Mr. Shangshu, all the power of the Ministry of Hubu was in the hands of Han Shilang. Although Mr. Fang was the left minister of the Ministry of Hubu, he came to the Ministry of Hubu. After all, the time was too short, and in terms of impact, it was far from comparable to that of Han Shilang. When he walked back to the check-in room to continue supervising the plans, in a restaurant somewhere in the capital, Tang Jing raised his head and took a sip of wine, slamming the glass on the table. A young man at the table asked in surprise, "Brother Tang, what's going on? You're so angry. You became the head of the household department at a young age. I don't know how many people in Beijing envy you. What else is there to worry about?" Tang Jing did not answer, and another young man said, "Hey, Brother Tang, how are you doing with Princess Pingyang? Being the head of household department is just the beginning. If you can marry Princess Pingyang, you will be more valued by your majesty. When the time comes, Brother Tang is the number one among the younger generation in this court." Another person shook his head and said, "With the Tang family's connections and Prince Duan's connections, even without Princess Pingyang, Brother Tang has a bright future. Marrying Princess Pingyang is certainly beneficial, but it is not okay to support an ancestor in the family for no reason a good thing." Boom. Tang Jing dropped the wine glass heavily on the table and said in a deep voice, "Stop talking about it." Okay, let's not talk anymore." One person shook his head and said, "Brother Tang, don't just focus on drinking, eat more vegetables. You are listening to Novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. Please subscribe to receive new novels. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. Fortunate Young Gentleman. Author, Rong Xiao Rong. Chapter 294. The progress of the account settlement in the Duzi Yamen was very fast, and the enthusiasm of the accountants exceeded Tang Ning's expectations. They took the initiative to work overtime until late at night. At this speed, the first round of accounting will be completed before the end of the Yamen tomorrow at the latest. Without the most tedious sorting and classification work, each round in the future will be faster. In this way, Tang Ning does not have to worry too much about the accounts. After leaving the Yamen, Tang Yaoyao and Jiu'er were already waiting outside. As the three walked towards Tianrunju, Tang Yaoyao whispered, "Do you think this method is okay?" "It should be okay." Tang Ning nodded and said, "Don't you know Jiu'er's ability?" Jiu'er patted her chest and assured, "Don't worry, miss, I will definitely not reveal the truth." Tang Yaoyao thought about it, and then asked, "Then can I take my aunt out in the future?" Tang Ning shook his head and said, "No, I can only come out once in a while. If a stranger often comes in and out of the Tang mansion, even if he changes his appearance, it will definitely arouse suspicion from others." In Tianrunju, Jiu'er was sent to the backyard. Tang Yaoyao sat in Sumei's room, looking at the big rag doll on her bed, and asked, "Why does this doll look familiar?" Tang Ning took a sip of tea, walked out of the yard, and said, "Xiao Tao, lend me your Xiao Qing to play with again." Xiao Tao was not the only one in the yard, The old woman was also sitting on the stone bench. Tang Ning was walking in the yard. The old woman glanced at him and asked, "Boy, I heard that you encountered some troubles in the Ministry of Revenue." Tang Ning stopped and said, "It's a small trouble, no problem." "Small trouble," the old woman glanced at him and said, "A sheep in the tiger's mouth is also a small trouble." Tang Ning looked at her and asked, "What do you mean?" The old woman said disdainfully, "The people of Prince Duan are all over the Ministry of Revenue. If you are not careful, there will be a disaster of overthrow. You actually think it is a small trouble?" Tang Ning thought for a while and said, "The old lady's news is a bit outdated. Minister Wei has been transferred. The Tang family has only 2 principals at most. What kind of disaster is overthrowing?" The old woman sneered and said, "Did the old woman mention the Tang family just now?" Tang Ning was stunned, looked at the old woman, and asked, "What does the old lady mean?" Inside the room, Su Mei was lying on the bed holding the baby, while Tang Yaoyao was sitting at the table. She glanced at her and pouted, "How old are you, but you are still so childish, like a child." Su Mei smiled and said, "You are not young anymore, aren't you also like a child?" When she said this, her eyes intentionally or unintentionally swept across Tang Yaoyao's chest. Tang Yaoyao was stunned, and suddenly stood up, and said angrily, "What do you mean? Miss, come and take a look." At this time, Xiu'er's voice came from outside the door, her tone full of pride. Tang Yaoyao walked out of the room and looked at the strange woman next to Xiu'er. She was a little puzzled and asked, "Aunt, is it really you?" Su Mei walked out of the room and her expression also changed. She said, "It's amazing. If it weren't for the clothes, I almost couldn't recognize my mother." Tang Yaoyao was stunned and asked uncertainly, "Mother?" Su Mei smiled at her and said, "Miss Tang, you should call me aunt." It turned out that Xiu'er was really Xiu, and Tang Ning admired her very much. Although she didn't turn decay into magic like the disguise in the novel, after her hands, Tang Ning couldn't even recognize her own mother, let alone others. Even Tang Yaoyao was shocked by Xiu'er. On the way back, she didn't say a word. When they returned home, Tang Yaoyao suddenly looked at him and asked, "Why did Su Mei call Auntie Mom?" Tang Ning looked at her and explained, "My mother adopted her as her daughter, and she is now my sister." Tang Yaoyao glanced at him and said in a complicated tone, "Why do you have so many sisters?" Tang Ning looked at her and said, "I also have a sister, Xiao Xiao, if you want, you can also call me brother." "Bah, who wants to be your sister?" Tang Yaoyao spat secretly, stamped her toes, and flew over the courtyard wall lightly. Tang Ning curled her lips. She didn't want to call him, but he didn't care. Whoever wants to be her foster brother must be tortured to death by her. In Tianrunju, Su Mei walked out of the room and looked at the old woman in the yard and said, "What did you say to him just now?" "What are you worried about?" The old woman glanced at her and said, "I just reminded him that there is another fierce tiger in the Ministry of Revenue, so that he won't be careless and die in the Ministry of Revenue." Su Mei frowned and asked, "Do you want to remind him or use him?" "Remind or use?" The old woman looked at her and said, "He took advantage of us so much, he should compensate us. How can you borrow without paying back in this world?" Su Mei said dissatisfiedly, "The old fox in the Ministry of Revenue has not revealed his feet for so many years. He has only been in the Ministry of Revenue for a few days. How could he? Don't you know how capable your foster brother is?" The old woman glanced at her and deliberately emphasized the 3 words foster brother. Tang Ning was sitting in his duty room. He had already calculated the accounts for the previous quarter yesterday. He had already calculated them for the second time this morning. The result was slightly different from the first time. During the third calculation, he found the reason. An accountant had miscalculated a number. After correcting it, he calculated it again and it was correct. He waved to a scribe, who immediately came over. Tang Ning handed him the accounting book and said, "Take it to the two ministers." The clerk nodded in agreement and walked out of the check-in room holding the account book. He walked to the other duty room, looked at Das Hifang Jishi who looked tired, and said, "Everyone has worked hard these days." "It's not hard, it's not hard. Master Tang is the one who works hard. It's all thanks to Mr. Tang that the calculation can be completed so early this time." Zhang Jishi immediately stood up and saluted, his face full of respect and admiration. Tang Ning waved her hands and said, "This is all thanks to all of you. I'm going to treat you today. After I go to office, I'll treat you all to a drink at Tianashanju." "Thank you, sir. I never thought that I, old Chen, would be able to have a meal at Tianashanju in this life. This time, we can finally see what this natural residence looks like." While Ji Shimin of Duzi Fang was cheering, in another room, Han Ming, the right servant of the Ministry of Revenue, stood up in surprise and asked, "Is it over so soon?" The same accounts in previous years, with nearly 20 people in Duzhufang, and accounting day and night, it took nearly 10 days to complete the errand. This time, the number of people in Duzhufang was reduced by half, and the time was not extended, but shortened by half. "It's really unbelievable." He waved his hand and said, "Bring it over and let me take a look." The scribe immediately handed over the account book. Before officially handing it over, Tang Ning had asked them to convert the last delivered book into Chen Qiaotong's Chinese characters. Han Ming flipped through it and saw that the account book was in good order. He murmured, "Incredible, really incredible, Mr. Tang, it's too fast." He handed the account book to Fang Zhe and asked, "Master Fang, do you want to see it?" Fang Zhe waved his hand and said, "As long as Mr. Han thinks there are no problems, I won't read it." Han Mingdao, there shouldn't be any big difference. The tax revenue is about the same as last year. The decrease in expenditures should be related to the reduction in the amount of money allocated by the Ministry of Water Resources. Speaking of which, it is also because of the Tang dynasty that the court can save money, these hundreds of thousands of taels of silver. He looked at Fang Zhe and said, "If Master Fang feels there is no problem, I will submit this book to Master Shangshu." Fang Zhe nodded and agreed. At the same time, other rooms in the household department were also in a state of excitement. The Du branch has already finished the calculation. How many days has it been? This is not true. Dr. Chen took away half of the history, and they can shorten the time by half. How is this possible? Haha, you have forgotten that there is Director Tang in the Du branch. Do you think that the number one scholar in Sanyuan and the third place is just like us? Master Tang is mighty and worthy of being the fastest man in the household department. While the entire household department was in a state of turmoil, Tang Ning was thinking about things while waiting in the office. Although the accounting matter has come to an end, there is still one thing in Tang Ning's mind that she has not let go of. The old woman didn't tell him who the tiger in the household department was. It was impossible for Fang Zhe. Han Chilang didn't look like him, Qian Shangshu, it seemed unlikely. According to what the old woman said, King Duan was so secretive. He once occupied at least 2 of the 3 ministers and 2 ministers in the household department. In this way, the household department was like his back garden. In this way, the things he discovered were not so strange. The water in the household department is very deep. It involves the country's money and food. It is difficult for ordinary people to get into it. If you act rashly without a deep background, you may be chewed up to the dregs. Tang Ning didn't think his background was very deep. He was from a small family, and he didn't have a reliable boss. Since the matter was serious, he planned to stay put until he determined the target. Guessing that the time for going to the lower office was coming soon, he packed up his things and stood up to go back after the gong of the lower office sounded. At this moment, a scribe hurriedly walked in and said, "Master Tang, Shilang Fang asked you to come over. For the fastest updated and error-free novel reading, please visit and bookmark this site to read the latest novels. Fortunate Young Gentleman. Author, Rong Xiao Rong. Chapter 295. Servant Fang. Tang Ning paused as she was about to walk out. She had already handed in the completed account books. What did Fang Zhe want from him? Even though he had been at peace in the past few days since he came to Hubu, he did not let down his guard. Fang Zhe is the left minister of the Ministry of Household Affairs, and he firmly holds the second position in the household department. Although the person actually sitting in the second position is Minister Han, a skinny camel is bigger than a horse, and a minister with no power is not something he can do as a principal. Touched. Think about it from another angle. If he were Fang Zhe, the person who had beaten him happened to be his subordinate, and he would see him every day without looking up. If he were Fang Zhe, the person who offended him would have been killed long ago. After looking at countless different angles, Tang Ning felt that she couldn't go on this trip. Go tell Mr. Fang that I have gone home. Tang Ning waved her hand and quickly walked out of Duzi Yamen. The moment she stepped out of the door, she saw Fang Zhe standing in front of him with his hands behind his back. He turned around and looking at him. What a coincidence, I was just about to meet Mr. Fang. Tang Ning stopped, looked at him and asked, I wonder what Mr. Fang wants to see me for. Fang Zhe looked at him and said calmly, come in and talk. Tang Ning followed him into a check-in room with a gloomy look on her face. Shilang Han was not there, so he must have left. There were only two people in the check-in room, Tang Ning and Fang Zhe. Fang Zhe waited for him to walk in and then closed the door. Tang Ning didn't care. If Fang Zhe wanted to do something in this check-in room, he would be humiliating himself. He was not worried that Fang Zhe had ambushed someone in this small check-in room. Looking around, he could see that there were hidden places where people could be hidden. Even when it is full of people, he has nothing to fear. It was a fact that he couldn't beat Tang Yao Yao, but for him, it was also a fact that no one in the entire household department could beat him. The accounts settled by Duzi Yamen have been handed over to Qian Shangshu. Fang Zhe sat down in his seat and said, did you encounter any problems during the calculation of the accounts? No. Tang Ning shook her head and said, Duzi Yamen is only responsible for settling accounts, not checking them. Without the ins and outs of the figures, what problems can we encounter? Fang Zhe looked at him and said calmly, you may not know that Minister Han is Prince Duan's secret agent in the household department. Tang Ning was surprised. Han Ming, the right minister of the Ministry of Finance, was pretty good to him. Although he knew that there was another secret agent of Prince Duan in the Ministry of Finance, he was not sure whether it was Minister Qian or Minister Han, and whether it was from the court or among the people. There is not even a little rumor about this. Fang Zhe slept in the Hanlin Academy for 14 years, how could he be better informed than Su Mei? Even though Su Mei never told him explicitly, after the last incident, he could guess that naturally living in Beijing, there must be a huge and incredible intelligence network. He looked at Fang Zhe and asked, how did Master Fang know? As long as something has happened in this world, there will definitely be some clues. Fang Zhe looked forward and said, if you look carefully, you can always find something. Who knows if Fang Zhe is tricking him? Since Han Ming is a member of King Duan and King Duan hates him to the core, how can he be safe and sound during these days in the Hubu? As if knowing that Tang Ning didn't believe it, Fang Zhe handed over a booklet and said, this is the tax account book of each state calculated by the Du branch from the 20th to the 23rd year of Xin Yuan. Take a look. Tang Ning took the account book. What was recorded on it was the tax situation of the various states in Chen State in the past 4 years. Since Fang Zhe asked him to take a look, it meant that there was something wrong with the account book, but Tang Ning's brain was not a computer, so she couldn't take a look at it. He analyzed whether there was a problem with the account book, and this was only partial data. In the absence of data, the methods he knew were of little use. Even he couldn't figure it out. If Feng Zhe could find the problem from this pile of data, Tang Ning would admit that he was really a beast. Feng Zhe took a sip of tea and continued, look at the tax figures of Bozhu, Xiangzhou and Weizhou in recent years. Tang Ning glanced at the paper and said, what's wrong with Bozhu, Xiangzhou and Weizhou? The tax revenue has been stable in the past few years, with increases and decreases, but not by much. It's not normal anymore. What's the problem? Feng Zhe put down the teacup and said, Bozhu Chronicles, Volume 53, Section 10. It is a history book compiled by the Hanlin Academy. It records the system and customs of the Chen state in detail, including the major and minor events that occur in each state capital every year. This is what Kui Lang did in the Hanlin Academy. This set of books, Tang Ning, when I was in Hanlin Academy, I had already seen the latest compilation. Bozhu Chronicles, Volume 53, Section 10, Tang Ning recalled for a moment in his mind and murmured, in June of the 21st year of Xin Yuan, there was a slight drought in Hebei province. Bozhu, Xiangzhou and Weizhou, especially when people are in exile. Feng Zhe looked at him with a slightly strange expression on his face. Scholar Zhou said that you have photographic memory. It seems that what he said is true. Putting aside the question of whether it was true or not, Tang Ning found that he couldn't keep up with Feng Zhe's rhythm. He was talking with a hammer here and a stick here and there. He still didn't understand what he meant by saying so much. When he glanced at the book in his hand, he looked at the numbers on the paper and finally found something. His expression was slightly startled. In June of the 21st year of Xin Yuan, there was a slight drought in Hebei province, especially in Bozhu, Xiangzhou and Weizhou, and the people went into exile. This is what it says, but the problem is, in the 21st year of Xin Yuan, this taxes in the three states are actually the highest in the past 4 years. The people have all run away. Who will the governments of these three states turn to collect taxes? Under normal circumstances, this possibility will not happen unless someone has tampered with the tax figures and ignored the actual situation of these three states. The tax figures for the 21st year of Xin Yuan are higher than those for the past 3 years, which means that the taxes for these 3 years have been tampered with. It is audacious to tamper with the taxes directly. Bozhu, Xiangzhou and Weizhou are only 3 states in Hebei province. All the states added together are probably not as good as a state in the rich land of Jiangnan. It is normal that they are not taken seriously on weekdays. The Ministry of Revenue will not think of these when clearing the accounts. After all, the taxes in recent years are almost the same. Who has nothing to do will check whether there is a drought in these states. Facts have proved that there are still people who have nothing to do. It can be inferred from the few words in the corners of Chenshu that someone has tampered with the taxes of Bozhu, Xiangzhou and Weizhou. This kind of person is too terrible, and we must keep a distance from him in the future. Tang Ning still had one thing he didn't understand. He looked at him and continued to ask, Han Shilang is in charge of the taxes in Hebei province. He is involved in this matter. But even so, how did Lord Fang infer that Han Shilang is the man of Prince Duan? Prince Duan is different from Prince Kang, who has the support of the powerful in Beijing. Prince Duan is backed by the Tang family and the civil servants belonging to the Tang family in the court. The characteristic of civil servants is poverty, so Prince Duan's financial resources should be far inferior to Prince Kang, but the fact is just the opposite. Prince Duan's financial resources are the best among all the kings. Feng Zhe took another sip of tea and continued, the crime committed by Han Shilang is a great crime of the Yi people. He is a poor minister and does not have such courage and sufficient reasons to do such a risky thing. What's more, if he really did it for himself, where did the huge wealth he embezzled over the years go? Tang Ning poured himself a cup of tea to moisten his throat. Han Shilang was so bold that he directly reached out to the court for taxes, which could not shock him. The seemingly honest Han Shilang was actually the Prince Duan's hidden man in the Ministry of Revenue, which did not stir up much waves in his heart. What made him feel a little scalp numb was that Fang Xiaopang's father, based on the sentence above, in the 21st year of Xingyuan, in June, there was a slight drought in Hebei province, especially in Bozhu, Xiangzhou, and Weizhou, and people fled. He deduced that Han Ming, the right Shilang of the Ministry of Revenue, was the Prince Duan's hidden man, and embezzled a large amount of tax silver from the court, including the whereabouts of the tax silver. He raised his head and looked at Fang Jie, who had thick eyebrows and big eyes and was elegant, and suddenly felt a little creepy. This is a monster. The real monster. Recommended new book by the urban god Lao Shi. Fortunate Young Gentleman. Author, Rong Xiao Rong. Chapter 296. Han Shilang has touched the country's taxes, and it is possible that it is not just Bozhu and other 3 states. This is to confiscate the family and exterminate the clan. But what Tang Ning didn't expect was that since Fang Jie had already seen this, he only needed to report to the court and send the censor to check the accounts of Bozhu and the 3 states. Wouldn't the truth be revealed? Even though Shilang Han had already colluded with several states, taxes were imposed layer by layer. It was impossible for them to arrange everything. If they continued to investigate layer by layer, they would eventually find out. In any case, there was no need for him to talk about this to himself. Fang Jie closed the account book and said casually, "You are thinking, since I already know about Minister Han's embezzlement of taxes, why don't I report it directly to the court instead of telling you?" It was actually very uncomfortable to communicate with Fang Jie. He always stood from God's perspective, and this position was usually held by Tang Ning herself. Fang Jie didn't wait for his answer, and spoke again, "Nothing can be found in the household accounts. If you want to thoroughly investigate this matter, you must send people to Bozhu and Sanzhou. This will take a long time, and it will be full of information if there are variables. If you are not careful, all your previous efforts will be wasted." Tang Ning looked at him and asked, "But Mr. Fang still hasn't explained, why did you tell me this matter?" Fang Jie said, "I need a method that won't alert the enemy to the situation and find out the accounting problems in the accounts department." Tang Ning asked, "For example?" Fang Jie said, "The accounts of the Ministry of Accounts are fake, and someone has tampered with them. The accounts of the Department of Accounts are running accounts, with only numbers and no context. The branch office does calculation work. If you want to audit the accounts to see if any officials have withheld taxes or committed corruption, you cannot tell it by looking at the accounts of the Department of Accounts alone. It is necessary to trace the origin of each payment and find out the source of each payment. This is an extremely huge task, time-consuming and labor-intensive. Perhaps before the court has made arrangements, the other party has already made preparations to kill people, silence them, and destroy evidence. Unless there is no audit, it can be seen from the account books of the Ministry of Accounts that someone has tampered with it, and the tax figures of the 3 states of Bozhu are not that convincing." Fortunately, Fang Jie didn't notice. Otherwise, Tang Ning would have wondered whether he had also traveled from some future era. Tang Ning nodded and said, "Some of the accounts are indeed fake." Although he had evidence that someone in the account department was making false accounts, this matter involved too much. The game between the bosses and the bosses, before he became the boss, it was better to stand aside and watch the fun. Fang Jie looked at him and asked with interest, "How did you tell?" Tang Ning looked at him and asked, "Mr. Fang, in your opinion, among all the accounting data, what percentage of the total data does the number starting with 1 account for?" "Of all the numbers, the first one is from 1 to 9. According to common sense, the first one is 1, which should account for more than 10%. Fang Jie thought for a moment, looked at him, and said, "I'm afraid the fact is not according to common sense." Bar. Tang Ning said, "If Mr. Fang can trust his accountant, he can use this method to tally the Fang family's account books. If the account data is more than 1,000, the result will be known." "There is no need for this." Fang Jie shook his head and said, At the feet of the emperor of Jiangxi province, there are censors who collect taxes every year. There will be no problems with the accounts. You can tell by using the account books of Jiangxi province. Fang Zhe casually opened the account book in his hand. Each page of this account book had 20 entries. After flipping through a few pages, he closed it and murmured, "Take out hundreds of accounts, and the first one accounts for 30% more than 3 times the amount predicted by common sense. Why is this so?" Downing doesn't know the underlying reason for Benford's law. He only knows that in a bunch of data drawn from real life, the probability of a number with 1 as the first digit appearing is about 30% of the total, which is close to 1/9 of the expected value. 3 times, this is also known as the first law of numbers. This number law was often used in the field of economics in later generations. Through this law, digital fraud can be detected. In later generations, many listed companies' false financial reports fell on this law. Although this law seems counterintuitive and anti-human, it does exist and has been verified under big data. Sometimes science is so unreasonable and unintuitive. For example, who else in Chengguo it can be imagined that big rocks and small rocks thrown down from the same height actually fall to the ground at the same speed. Intuition is sometimes not necessarily correct. Those who make false accounts have such loopholes because they believe in their intuition too much. Tang Ning looked at him and said, "Master Fang can do more verification." Fang Zhe nodded, with a strange color in his eyes, and said, "You are so careful and can detect things that ordinary people cannot. You are indeed a monster." Tang Ning secretly sighed in her heart. How could Fang Zhe have the nerve to call others monsters? He was just relying on the experience and knowledge of future generations. Fang Zhe himself was the monster among monsters and the beast among beasts. If such a person were to trick someone, the other party might not even know how to die. How could such a pure and innocent girl like Fang Xiaoyu have such a father? Her family was unfortunate, her family was unfortunate. Fang Zhe wanted to stay at the Ministry of Household Affairs to check whether the first law of numbers was correct, but Tang Ning didn't have time to stay with him any longer. They have been in the Yamen for a while. If they don't go back, they will be in a hurry. There were still some officials from the Ministry of Revenue who had not returned. They watched Tang Ning open the door and walk out from a distance, with a look of surprise on their faces. "Just now, I saw Mr. Fang summoning Mr. Tang in." They deliberately stayed in the household department for a while, just to see the excitement. After all, everyone in the household department knew about their grievances. Everyone had been waiting for this excitement for a long time. However, the imagined fight did not happen. Principal Tang stayed in the room for a while and then walked out. There seemed to be no injuries on his body. Could it be that Fang Shilang was beaten again? It wasn't until Fang Zhe walked out of the check-in room intact that everyone gradually dispersed, but the doubts in their hearts deepened. The two of them didn't take action. So what happened in the check-in room just now? This matter has temporarily become the topic of the Ministry of Household Affairs. An unsolved mystery in everyone's mind. Imperial Palace, just after the morning court, when Emperor Chen walked back to the imperial study, he saw a figure standing at the door. Zhao Man looked at him and was about to cry, "Father." Emperor Chen looked at her and said helplessly, "Father promised you not to let you go to the grassland to get married. Why don't you believe it?" Zhao Man shook his head and said, "I don't believe it, unless my father sets a written pledge." "Nonsense," Emperor Chen glanced at her and said, "the rules are becoming more and more unruly. I will punish you to face the wall in the palace for 3 days. You are not allowed to come out without my permission." After saying that, he waved his sleeves and walked into the imperial study. When Zhao Man heard this, his face turned pale and he immediately said, "Father." Wei Jian stopped Zhao Man, who was about to catch up, winked at her, and whispered, "Princess, please go back to the palace first. Don't make your majesty angry." Zhao Man walked back to the palace gloomily, and then Wei Jian walked slowly into the palace and said, "Your Majesty, Mr. Qian from the Ministry of Revenue just handed over a note, saying that the accounts for last season have been calculated. Please take a look at it." "So fast," Chen Huang said in surprise, and then said, "Bring it to me to see." Every time the accounts of the Ministry of Accounts are calculated, the results will not be released until the last day, but this time the number of people was reduced by half, and the time was moved forward a few days, which made him a little unbelievable for a moment. It was calculated so quickly, and I was not disappointed. He flipped through it and said, "The taxation has not changed much, but the expenditure has been much less. He has saved me a lot of money this time." Wei Jian stepped forward and said, "Your Majesty, there is another envelope here, which was handed over directly by Minister Fang." "Fangzhe," Chen Huang raised his eyebrows and asked, "You handed it over directly without going to Shangsha province?" Wei Jian bowed and said, "Your Majesty, no." Emperor Chen took the document, looked at it doubtfully, and then said in surprise, "This thing sounds strange. If it is true, the court won't have to worry about auditing the accounts in the future." He looked at Wei Jian and said, "Have someone bring over some account books from the Ministry of Internal Affairs, and then find a few people from the Hanlin Academy and ask them to come here." The Ministry of Internal Affairs is the department responsible for palace affairs, including the royal family's finances. It is handled by the Ministry of Internal Affairs. Although he did not know His Majesty's intention, Wei Jian immediately followed the instructions. While several Hanlin officials were sorting out and classifying the accounts, Emperor Chen put down the memorial and asked, "I can't figure out whether this matter is true or false." Wei Jian smiled and said, "I can't understand it either, but since it was proposed by Tang Xiaozuan and verified by Fang Shilang, I guess it can't be false." Chen Huang nodded and said, "Both of them are monsters that have never been seen in a century, and they will not target without aim." Half an hour later, Wei Jian stepped forward with a piece of paper in his hand and said, "Your Majesty, several officials have classified the accounts according to what you said." Chen Huang was reviewing the memorial and asked casually, Which number is the highest?" Wei Jian looked down and said, "Your Majesty, it's 5. Chen Huang paused, threw the folder in his hand on the table, picked up Fang Zhe's letter again, and looked at it. At the end of the memorial, there is a clearly written sentence. "Anyone who falsifies accounts will usually be ranked number 5 or 6. Emperor Chen slapped his hand on the table and said angrily, "Tell the Chamberlain to get out of here." You are listening to Novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. Please subscribe to receive new novels. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. Fortunate Young Gentleman. Author, Rong Xiao Rong. Chapter 297. The palace, which has always been deserted and lonely, is unusually lively today. There were constant wails and screams. The eunuchs and maids in the palace saw from afar that a eunuch and 2 eunuchs were dragged out of the imperial study and caned in public by the guards, and they were extremely terrified. I don't know what these 3 people did wrong. The guards have not stopped after beating them 50 times. It seems that His Majesty is very angry this time. The eunuchs in charge of guarding the imperial study have long been worried and trembling. Zhao Yuan was holding an exquisite box. When he walked to the door of the imperial study, he saw the 3 people being caned, his eyes turned, and he went back the same way. He walked into the palace with the box, and immediately a group of girls surrounded him. He pinched a ball from the box and threw it into his mouth, opened the box, and said, "One person can only take one." "Thank you, Brother Yuan." A group of little girls rushed to take the balls from the box, and a delicate girl came over hesitantly and slowly stretched out her hand. Zhao Yuan saw her and smiled, saying, "They can only eat one, you can eat all." The little girl only pinched 2 and said with a red face, "Thank you, Brother Yuan." "You're welcome." Zhao Yuan wiped his hands and said, After school, I will take you to the imperial kitchen to eat delicious food. Fang Xiaoyu came over, looked at him and asked, I will go to brother Tang Ning's house later, do you want to go? Zhao Yuan said regretfully, my father has not allowed me to leave the palace casually recently, so I'd better go and play with my sister from the Wang family. The accounts of the Duzhifang were settled, and it happened to be a holiday. Tang Ning handed all the evidence on the accounts to Fang Zhe. Han Chilang was the man of Prince Duan, so Tang Ning naturally didn't want him to have an easy life, but the person who didn't want him to have an easy life was Fang Xiapeng's father. Han Chilang has been in the Ministry of Revenue for many years. Apart from Minister Qian, he has all the power. It is easy for him to sideline Fang Zhe, who has just arrived. Tang Ning was still doubting that Fang Zhe would not be excluded by Han Chilang with his ability. Now she understands that if he does not move, it will be fine. If he moves, it will destroy the world and make the other party have no chance to turn over. Emperor Chen hates corruption. It is said that he almost beat 2 eunuchs of the Ministry of Internal Affairs to death yesterday. Those who dare to touch the national tax silver will naturally have no good end. There is nothing to do today. Xiao Ai and Qing Er returned to the county government, and Tang Ning and Xiru went to the shop on the street. Tang Grenzai is responsible for the source books, but it is actually various peripherals that make money. He asked Xiru to run a shop when she is bored to avoid boredom on weekdays. When they arrived at the shop, Sumei had already arrived. Xiru walked to the side of another figure, lowered her head, and called her mother with a red face. There was a shop in front and a house with a yard in the back. The two of them went to the backyard. Sumei stayed in the shop. She walked to his side and whispered, Prince Duan's spy in the Ministry of Revenue is Han Ming, the right assistant minister of the Ministry of Revenue. You should be careful in the Ministry of Revenue. It's good to have a sister who is very crooked. When he asked the old woman, she didn't tell him. Tang Ning felt that those few calls of sister were not in vain. I know. Tang Ning sat down at the table and said, Han Ming used his position to manipulate the taxes of several states. He was the money bag of Prince Duan. He was hidden in the Ministry of Revenue for so many years and no one had discovered it. Are you telling the truth? Sumei obviously didn't know about this matter and said in surprise, although we guessed that there was a relationship between Han Ming and Prince Duan, we didn't expect that he was so bold as to directly manipulate the taxes. Tang Ning shook her head and said, You are my sister, how dare I lie to you? Sumei looked at him and said seriously, this matter involves too many people. Once it is disclosed, it will definitely cause a strong counterattack from Prince Duan. Don't act rashly. Tang Ning nodded and said, Don't worry, I won't act rashly. After Han Ming left, half of the Ministry of Revenue became Fang. Fang Zhe obviously didn't want to be a lazy fish like before, and he would not tolerate the Ministry of Revenue having an opponent like Han Ming. He would definitely not miss this opportunity. Tang Ning had done what he should do, and the next thing would be handed over to him. There were footsteps at the door, and it was obvious that another guest had arrived. A woman stood on the street, waved to a middle-aged couple, and said, Dad, Mom, you guys go shopping first, I'll go take a look inside. Tang Shui walked into the store and looked at Tang Ning. When he saw Sumei beside him, he closed his mouth again. Don't worry, we're on the same side. Tang Ning looked at her and said, Mom and Xiru are inside, go in by yourself. Tang Shui looked at Sumei and walked in quickly. Tang Ning looked at Sumei, thought about it, and couldn't help asking, there's something I've always been curious about. Who are you and that old woman? What do you want to do at Tianrunju? I can't tell you that. Sumei looked at him and said, but I can promise that I will never hurt you. Tang Ning didn't doubt this. Su Fox had already tasted the sweetness. If she stopped taking the medicine, she would never be able to sleep well in the future. She would never sacrifice her happiness for the rest of her life. But he was still curious, so he thought about it and asked, Are you planning to rebel? No, Su Mei glanced at him and said, don't ask me. I'll tell you later when I have a chance. If they weren't planning to rebel, why wait until later? Tang Ning couldn't ask any more because Su Mei had already stood up and walked to the backyard. If Tang Shui stayed in the store for too long, people would suspect her. A quarter of an hour later, they walked out. Tang Shui looked back and walked out of the store. The middle-aged couple came out of another shop, and the woman asked, what did Shui buy? Tang Shui shook the object in his hand and said, a hairpin. The woman shook her head and said, why does this hairpin look like a snake, crooked? Tang Shui couldn't help but laugh and said, Mother, you don't know, this is the most popular white snake hairpin this month. I also bought a green snake hairpin, one for each of us. The middle-aged man did not speak, his eyes rested on a woman walking out of the shop, and he did not look back until the group of people disappeared. Is she pretty? A voice suddenly came from beside her. The middle-aged man turned back and said with a smile, after looking at her for so long, I still can't find anything better about her than you. Tang Shui couldn't help but hugged his arms tightly and said, Father, Mother, you go shopping, I'll go to the front alone. In the Tang family, Tang Zhao slapped his hand on the table and said angrily, what, that guy is finished so quickly. Tang Qi glanced at him and said, when you eat, just eat well. How can you be so noisy? What a bad luck, Tang Zhao snorted coldly and took a big mouthful of rice. Tang Jing, who was sitting next to him, picked up his chopsticks, glanced at Tang Zhao, and then looked at the food on the table, unable to take down his chopsticks. After the dinner, Tang Qi looked at Tang Huai in the study and said, now that Fang Zhe is in the Ministry of Household Affairs, he should remind Han Ming to be more careful in his work. If anything happens to him, it will have a great impact on King Duan. Don't worry, Han Ming knows what he knows. Tang Huai stood up, walked to the window, and said, even if Fang Zhe is capable, he is just a toothless tiger in the household department. Han Ming has been operating in the household department for many years, and he has already deep-rooted and not easily shaken. A certain room in the household department. Fang Zhe closed a book in his hand, looked at Han Ming and said, Master Han, if I remember correctly, it seems that Zhou Shilang should be responsible for the taxes of Hebei province. Earlier, Master Wei was transferred to a distant place, and Master Han was in charge of all the roads. I'm afraid I'm very tired. It's been a while since I came to the Ministry of Revenue. It's time to let go of the burden on Mr. Han's shoulders. Han Ming's eyelids twitched, and then he smiled and said, Master Fang doesn't know something. I have always been responsible for the taxes in Hebei province. I am already familiar with this. If Master Fang takes over rashly, I'm afraid there will be a rush. I missed something important. Mr. Fang has just arrived at the Ministry of Finance, so it's better to get familiar with the daily life of the Ministry of Finance first. Fang Zhe smiled and said, thank you, Mr. Han, for your understanding. Han Ming nodded and said, it should be. Tang Ning had been paying attention to Fang Zhe's movements in the past 2 days, but he seemed to be very calm and not in any hurry. Since coming to this world, there are 2 people he can't understand the most. One is Su Mei and the other is Fang Zhe. Although the latter looks warm and gentle, he always gives people a very dangerous feeling and cannot guess. What kind of medicine is he selling in his gourd? No matter what kind of medicine he sells in his gourd, he only intends to stand aside and watch the excitement of this matter. He was fiddling with his abacus boredly, when suddenly a figure walked in. He raised his head and saw Mr. Chen, who had not seen him for many days, quickly walking into the check-in room and asked, Mr. Tang, how is the accounting verification going? After finishing the matter over there, I rushed back without stopping. I hope to return the favor, it's urgent. Mr. Chen, let's have a cup of tea first. Tang Ning waited for him to sit down before saying, Mr. Chen, don't worry, the accounts have been settled 2 days ago. Puff. Tang Ning jumped quickly and dodged the tea sprayed from the front. Dr. Chen didn't bother to wipe his saliva and said in shock, "What, the calculation has been completed, so fast?" Tang Ning nodded and said, "It was over in the first 2 days." Before Mr. Chen could speak, a man suddenly walked in from outside the door. He looked at Tang Ning and said, "Mr. Tang, Master Shangshu asked you to come over." Fortunate young gentleman. Author, Rong Xiao Rong. Chapter 298. This was strange for Tang Ning. He had been in the Ministry of Accounts for so long, but he had never seen Jian Shangshu and Fang Jie several times. When Duzi Yamen was under great pressure to settle accounts, he had never seen them caring. Now the accounts have finally been settled. Okay, one of them finished calling and the other called again. What kind of medicine is being sold in the gourd? He walked to the door of Jian Shangshu's room and knocked on the door. Jianshuo, the Minister of Household Affairs, looked up and said, "Master Tang, please come in." Tang Ning walked into the door. Jianshuo said again, "Mr. Tang, please close the door." Tang Ning closed the door full of doubts, wondering what Jian Shangshu wanted to do with him. She turned around and saw Fang Jie sitting in the corner, and she immediately understood. The beasts of Sanyuanjiti really couldn't believe it. This guy must have sold himself out in a flash. Jianshuo looked at him and asked, "Mr. Tang should know why I came to you, right?" "I don't know." Tang Ning shook his head. He just had to fight against Han Ming, the Tang family, King Duan, the Fang family and Jian Shangshu. He, a small family like him, couldn't afford to lose. What Jianshuo wanted to say was blocked again. He took a sip of tea and then said, "I heard from Mr. Fang that Mr. Tang found a way to find out whether the accounts were falsified. I don't know if this is true." "Fake." Tang Ning said, "If Mr. Jian doesn't believe it, just look for some accounts that have not been tampered with and you will know after a try." Jianshuo asked, "But how do I know which accounts are true and which accounts are false?" Tang Ning thought for a while and said, "Sir, you can find some trustworthy accounting firms." Jianshuo, you know people well but don't know their hearts. Don't trust people's words easily. Even if I can trust you, it doesn't necessarily mean they are trustworthy. Tang Ning thought for a moment and said, "If you still don't believe me, you can check the household records. The number of births in Beijing every month in the past 10 years is still consistent with this result." Jian Shangshu thought for a while and said, "Even if the population's birth number is UN, how can we ensure that this method is also applicable to the account numbers?" Tang Ning secretly spat in his heart. This damn minister of the Ministry of Finance is not here, this is clearly a slut. He said expressionlessly, "Actually, this method is just a joke made by a low-ranking official. It cannot be taken seriously. If Jian Shangshu were if there's nothing else, I'll go back first." "Mr. Tang, please stay." Jianshuo stood up and said, "Mr. Tang, don't blame me for being verbose. In fact, this is a serious matter. We should not be careless and we must treat it with care." He looked at Tang Ning and said, "Tomorrow, I would like to invite Mr. Tang and Mr. Fang to accompany me to the palace to meet the Holy Spirit. It seems that this matter cannot be avoided." Tang Ningshen nodded helplessly and said, "I will follow the decision of Lord Shangshu." He and Fang Jie walked out of the room together and saw Minister Han walking over. "Master Tang, Minister Fang." Han Ming looked at them and was about to speak. Tang Ning looked up at the sky and said, "The weather is good today." "That's right, the sky is clear." Fang Jie responded, looking up at the sky covered with dark clouds, and said, "It looks like it's going to rain soon. Don't forget to bring an umbrella when you go out, Mr. Tang." The two walked down the steps and left separately. Han Ming looked at them and waved, inexplicable. This was the first time Tang Ning entered the palace since she left the Hanlin Academy and became the head of the household department. The two waited in the side hall for a while, and then a eunuch came forward to report and was summoned by His Majesty. Tang Ning and Fang Jie walked into the main hall. Before they saw each other, Chen Huang looked at them with a serious face and asked, "Is what Qian Shangshu said true?" Qian Shuo looked at Fang Jie, and Fang Jie looked at Tang Ning. Tang Ning secretly cursed an old fox in her mind and said with cupped hands, "Your Majesty, I was ordered to audit the account books of the household department this time. I found out that there are problems with some of the accounts. It is suspected that someone has tampered with the account numbers. These accounts are from Bojo, Xiangzhou, and Weizhu." Qianzhuo took a step forward and said, "Your Majesty, this matter is not trivial. I think we should discuss it after verifying the method proposed by Director Tang." "I have already verified it," Emperor Chen said with a gloomy face. "The young eunuch of the Ministry of Internal Affairs has embezzled more than 1,000 taels of silver. He confessed the day before yesterday. After completing the amount of embezzlement, the account situation is almost the same as the one presented by Fang Shilang. I also ordered people to check the account books of the Ministry of Internal Affairs in previous years, and found that there were not many changes. Although this method cannot be judged by common sense, it is an indisputable fact." Qianzhuo's eyes were filled with joy and he said, "Your Majesty, if this method is feasible, then the court's accounting will become simpler and simpler in the future, which will definitely serve as a great deterrent to corrupt officials. This is a method of clean government." Emperor Chen nodded, his face softened slightly, and he looked at Tang Ning and said, "You have made great contributions to the court this time, and you deserve a heavy reward. However, I ordered you to go out in 6 groups this time, and the court has objections. If you reward me again, I'm afraid it will arouse people's criticism. Let's do this. I will give the 2 ladies in your family, one a 6th grade imperial edict and the other a 7th grade edict. What do you think?" In the state of Chen, the emperor would reward the families of ministers who had made great achievements in the court. The wife would be of the husband's rank, with grades 1 to 5, and those with grades below 6 would be called the imperial edict. For officials, this was a great honor. Generally speaking, imperial decrees and edicts only reward the eldest wife of the family, and rarely reward 2 persons at a time. Although no substantial benefits were gained this time, it was very honorable to win a royal wife for Xiao Ai and Xiru. Tang Ning's thoughts moved and she bowed and said, "I thank your Majesty for your kindness." Emperor Chen nodded, looked at Wei Jian, and said, "Order the Hanlin Academy to draft an edict immediately." Qianzhuo added, "Your Majesty, since the court wants to use this method to check the accounts, this method must not be spread to outsiders." Tang Ning cupped her hands and said, "Your Majesty, don't worry, this minister only told Minister Fang." Qianzhuo said, "Your Majesty, Han Ming, the right minister of the Ministry of Revenue, how should we deal with it?" Chen Huang turned around and said, "Han Ming alone cannot handle the matter of embezzling tax money. I will order people to investigate the taxation of Bozhu, Xiangzhou, and Weizhu secretly. In addition, Han Ming is responsible for the taxation of Bozhu, Xiangzhou, and Weizhu. Other state capitals must also be thoroughly investigated one by one. Before that, don't let the news leak out." Tang Ning thought that Chen Huang would use his thunderous power to capture Han Ming in one fell swoop, but she didn't expect that he would actually arrange it like this. The meaning of this move is that this time, it is not enough to arrest only one Minister of Household Affairs. I am afraid that some officials in the court and some local officials will also suffer. He remembered a huge corruption case in the early Ming dynasty, in which the Minister of Household Affairs directly reached out to the National Tax Bank. The final result was that hundreds of officials below the 6th minister were beheaded, and the number of people implicated in the case reached tens of thousands. It seems that no emperor can tolerate such corruption. After walking out of the imperial study room, Shang Shiqian exhaled slowly and murmured, "I'm afraid things are going to change today." He looked at Tang Ning and said, "Master Tang, please be more careful these days." Tang Ning didn't want to wade into this muddy water, but she didn't expect to be dragged in by these two old foxes. If some people became angry and the old beggar was not around, he would really feel uneasy. He looked at Qian Shangshu and said, "Master Qian, this servant suddenly feels unwell." Qianshuo waved his hand and said, "I'll give you a month's leave. Mr. Tang will take good care of himself at home. If you can't take care of yourself in 1 month, I'll give you another month's leave." This made it much more practical. When Tang Ning and the two of them walked out of the palace, they reached a certain place and looked forward. Her expression suddenly changed and she said, "Master Qian, Master Fang, you go first. I'll go back later." Without waiting for Qianshuo and Fang Zhe to answer, he ducked behind a certain palace wall. "I haven't seen Zhao Yingying for several days. She seems to be in a bad mood today, so it's better to avoid her." He hid behind the palace wall for a while, guessing that she had already passed by. Then he walked to the corner and looked over. A familiar face quickly grew in size in front of his eyes. Zhao Man looked at him and asked with a smile, "Are you surprised? Are you surprised?" The expression on Tang Ning's face froze and she smiled dryly, "Your Highness, what a coincidence." Fortunate young gentleman. Author, Rong Xiao Rong. Chapter 299. Chapter 297 of the main volume of the Ruyi Young Man, The Troubles of the Girl Zhao Man. Unfortunately, Zhao Man looked at him, blinked, and said, "I just came here when I saw you." "What are you doing here?" "I'm here." Tang Ning looked around at the green palace walls and said, "I'm here to enjoy the scenery. The scenery here is not bad." Fortunately, Zhao Man did not expose him again and asked, "How is your trouble? Has it been resolved?" Tang Ning nodded and said, "Thank you for your concern, Princess. It has been resolved." He looked in the direction of the palace entrance. Emperor Chen had just granted Xiaoai a 6th grade edict, and Xiru a 7th grade edict. He was planning to go back and share it with them, but he didn't expect to meet Princess Yingying on the way. Zhao Man looked at him and asked, "Are you in a hurry and want to go back?" Tang Ning nodded and said, "It's something urgent." Zhao Man thought for a while and said, "Then I'll take you out." Tang Ning said hurriedly, "The princess has a noble status, how can she?" Zhao Man waved her hand and said, "I want to take a walk anyway." It was still some distance from the palace gate. Tang Ning and she were walking on the road. Zhao Man was a little strange today. He stopped talking and didn't talk. He seemed to have something on his mind. He lowered his head and kicked his steps. Which girl is not worried at all? Maybe she encounters those inconvenient days every month, and she will be fine in a few days. Tang Ning Zhao Man was walking and suddenly turned to look at him. Tang Ning was thinking about when Xiao Ru and Xiao Yi would be changed from imperial orders to royal orders, and she casually agreed. Zhao Man asked in a daze, "Is your father good to you?" "I don't have a father." Tang Ning looked at her and said, "I haven't seen my father since I was a child." Only then did Zhao Man remember his life experience and apologized hastily, "I'm sorry, I didn't mean it." "It doesn't matter." Tang Ning waved her hand, indicating that she didn't care. Compared to the sarcastic and mocking looks or deliberately teasing words from her peers when she was in school, Zhao Yingying looked like she was sincerely apologizing from the bottom of her heart. For a moment, Tang Ning felt that despite being unruly, she was actually quite cute. "My mother-in-law also passed away when I was very young." Remembering that Tang Ning had the same life experience as her, Zhao Man looked at him with a look full of sympathy. Tang Ning shrugged and said, "Princess and your majesty is so kind to you." Frankly speaking, he also felt that Emperor Chen doted on Zhao Yingying, even taking her with him when leaving the palace. Among all the princesses in the royal family, she was the only one who had this treatment. "I accidentally heard my father and the prime minister discussing something that day," Zhao Man whispered. "My father wants to marry me to the Chu kingdom." Thinking of the words she heard while hiding behind the pillar that day, Zhao Man's eyes turned red. Originally she wanted to surprise her father, but she ended up leaning against the pillar alone, in a daze until late at night. Ah, Tang Ning looked at her and asked in surprise, is this happening? When the two countries Chen and Chu were in their honeymoon period, it was not uncommon for them to marry each other's princesses. When the Chu state was still weak, when the Chen state princess married, she was the mother of the country. When the Chu state princess married over, her status was not low. Now the bloodlines of the royal families of the two countries have actually merged with each other. To a certain extent, Emperor Chen's blood also contains part of the blood of the Chu royal family. When Tang Ning first threatened Zhao Man, she just casually said that there was a possibility of her marrying to the Chu country. She didn't expect that this poisonous milk would actually take effect. It turned out that Zhao Yingying was depressed because of this incident. Tang Ning looked at her and comforted her, actually, princess, there is no need to worry. Do you know who you are going to marry when you marry to the Chu kingdom? Zhao Man shook his head and said, I don't know. Tang Ning explained, our Princess Chen mainly married to the Chu kingdom, and she must marry the Chu kingdom's prince. However, the current Chu emperor has only one prince, the Chu kingdom's crown prince. Zhao Man glanced at her mouth and said, I don't want to marry the prince of Chu. Princess, don't worry, Tang Ning explained to her carefully, His Majesty will not let you be a concubine. However, the crown prince's concubine will be the queen of Chu state in the future, and her mother will be the best in the world. The current Chu state, she is no longer weaker than Chen. Does the princess think that the royal family of Chu will allow a foreign princess to be their queen? Zhao Man thought for a while, her eyes lit up, and she asked, you mean, even if my father wants me to marry, the Chu state will not agree? In this way, I still don't have to marry. Tang Ning nodded. Unless the royal family of the Chu kingdom had lost their minds. When the country's overall strength was rising and they were about to become the eldest brother, they would be willing to be subordinate to others and let a foreign princess become the queen. Since ancient times, this has only been the case for weak countries. The approach that will be taken. Haha, I don't need to get married. Zhao Man's mood instantly rose and she said, Tang, I will send you here. You can go back by yourself. I want to go back to the palace to play mahjong. Tang Ning looked at her retreating figure and shook her head. Women are indeed big pigs. When she was complaining about her grievances, she called him Tang Ning Ning. In the blink of an eye, she turned into Tang. She became ruthless, put on clothes and refused to recognize anyone. It was in vain that he had been a close friend for so long to enlighten her. Elder sister. I was delayed for a while with Zhao Man on the way, and when I got home, the house was already fried. The speed of the imperial edict was incredibly fast. The imperial edict to reward Xiaoi and Xiru arrived at Tang Ning's house before Tang Ning did. Even his father-in-law and mother-in-law were alerted and rushed over. Whether it is an official title or a title, there must be a salary. In recent years, the treasury is empty, and the court is very stingy with rewards. Only those with great merit will be granted. Since the death of the queen more than 10 years ago, the rewards of imperial edicts and imperial decrees have become even rarer. King Kishihua looked at the imperial uniforms they wore with envy, and the maids and servants in the mansion were even more happy and proud. Husband, you are back. Xiru and Xiaoi walked to his side, still a little at a loss. Tang Ning gently patted the back of their hands and said, these are all earned by your husband, don't worry about it. Looking at the imperial uniforms on his daughter, Chen Yuxian glanced at Zhong Mingli very obscurely. Zhong Mingli lowered his head and whispered, there will be more in the future, there will be more in the future. From today, Xiru and Xiaoi have truly entered the ranks of women of the imperial family. When Tang Ning is promoted, their grades will also be upgraded accordingly. Tang Yao stood aside holding a sword and watching the fun. At a certain moment, She walked to Tang Ning and whispered, "Their dresses are very beautiful. When will you give me one?" Tang Ning spent a lot of time to make it clear to Tang Yao Yao that these two dresses were not given away at will. Only the ladies who were awarded by the court could wear them. If others wore them, it would be against the rules and they would be arrested and imprisoned. Unless she could marry well like Xiru and Xiaoi, but this possibility was very small. After all, there were not many good families like this these days. Shang Shiqian gave him a long vacation, but he had to go to the Ministry of Revenue today. In addition to packing up his things, he also had to go through the leave procedures. Fang Zhe was not there, only Han Chilang was on duty. Han Ming looked at the paper in his hand and asked in surprise, "Master Tang wants to take such a long sick leave?" Tang Ning nodded and said, "I am not feeling well, so I will go home and rest for a while." "Master Tang is a pillar of the country, and your health is important." Han Ming signed his name on the paper and said, "I haven't congratulated Master Tang yet." The two ladies have been granted imperial titles. Since the death of the Queen, His Majesty has rarely granted titles to women of noble rank, which shows His Majesty's favor to Master Tang. Tang Ning looked at the lunch box on Han Ming's desk, which contained steamed buns and pickles. He looked at Han Chilang and said in surprise, "Master Han is eating this for lunch." Han Ming nodded and asked, "What's wrong?" Tang Ning shook his head and said, "I didn't expect that Master Han, as a minister of the Ministry of Revenue, is so frugal on weekdays. He is really a role model for our generation." Han Ming smiled and said, "Officials should start with themselves. If officials save a little, the people will have more. Master Han is frugal, and I admire him." Tang Ning nodded and said, "However, it is harmless to be extravagant occasionally. Master Han should eat more good food these days." You are listening to Novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. Please subscribe to receive new novels. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. Fortunate Young Gentleman. Author, Rong Xiao Rong. Chapter 300. The text of Ruyi Xiaolang Jun, Chapter 298. Then I will try Tang Ning's sick leave application. After Han Chilang and Qian Shangshu signed and filed it, it officially took effect. After returning to the Duzi Yamen and saying hello to Chen Langzhong, he left the Ministry of Revenue. Chen Lang was naturally happy to see this. Tang Ning was nominally his subordinate in the Duzi Yamen, but he, as a superior, could not afford to offend this subordinate. Moreover, during the time he was away from the capital, the Duzi Yamen, under the leadership of the other party, had incredibly completed the tasks that he thought were impossible to complete. The officials in the Yamen respected and obeyed him, and he, the Langzhong, was redundant. The clerks of the Duzi Yamen walked out of the Yamen to say goodbye. Although Tang Zushi had not been in the Duzi Yamen for a long time, he impressed everyone in the Yamen with his knowledge and mind. Of course, the most important thing was that after he left, they would fall from delicacies to cabbage buns. Tang Ning's departure made the officials above the Langzhong of the Ministry of Revenue breathe a sigh of relief. As long as he was in the Ministry of Revenue, all those who were higher in rank than him would have to hold their heads high, fearing that one day, they would add a heavy stroke to his record. Tang Ning was originally an unnecessary official in the Ministry of Revenue. His departure only caused some disturbances in the Ministry of Revenue, and the entire capital remained as calm as before. No one noticed his departure, just as no one noticed that late one night, the tightly closed gates of the capital suddenly opened, and more than 10 riders ran out of the palace and left the capital secretly. This was the first time Tang Ning had been so free since he officially joined the Hanlin Academy. Of course, although there was nothing important to do, he did not let himself be idle. He had long wanted to learn the method of poisoning from the old beggar. It might not be used to harm others, but at least he could ensure that he would not be poisoned. At this time, 10 days had passed since he took leave, and there was still no movement in the capital, but the secret agents sent by the court must have arrived in Bozhu and other places. If the journey went smoothly, they would have set off to return to the capital. The people of the capital still work from sunrise to sunset, and the officials go to court and leave court. No one knows that behind this seemingly calm situation, a bloody storm has been brewing. No need to go to work, in addition to practicing and studying every day, they live a shameless life, leisurely and comfortable. After more than half a year, Lu Lao has integrated all the beggars in the capital together. The beggars have changed from being a loose group to being organized and disciplined. Of course, organized beggars are still beggars. They are not of much use for the time being, and Tang Ning has no place to use them, so Lu Lao will be allowed to develop freely for the time being. The old beggar took Xiao Xiao out, saying that he would take her to experience for 3 days and learn some survival skills in the wild. The old beggar had taught the art of playing the piano, chess, calligraphy, and painting, as well as poetry and wine earlier. Whether it is 2 or 3 people, or 5 or 6 people, there are different formations and moves. Although the girls had no martial arts foundation, they had a good foundation in dancing and learned very quickly. When the 6 of them joined forces, Tang Ning had a hard time dealing with them. From this point of view, in the future, when they have achieved some success, there will be no problem in protecting Xiru and Xiaoi. He sat in the pavilion and looked at the poison scripture that the old beggar casually threw to him. Xiaoju walked in from outside, walked to his side, and said mysteriously, "I had a wet dream last night." When he said this, his face was a little red, but it was not shy, but obviously excited. Wet dreams are a normal manifestation of boys during puberty, but for Xiaoju, it was the first time that a hard dream had blossomed. After nearly a year of tossing and turning, he finally looked a little like a man. No matter how excited and happy he was, it was not surprising. Tang Ning bowed and said, "Congratulations." He didn't expect that one day he would actually congratulate others for having a wet dream. This feeling was really strange. Xiaoju patted his shoulder excitedly and said, "There will be a banquet at Tianrunju tonight. Wait for me for a while, I will come to find you, and we will go together." Tang Ning did not expect that Xiaoju was not excited enough, and actually wanted to celebrate with a banquet. In the entire capital, no, in the entire Chen state, there was no one else who would celebrate such a thing except him. After Xiaoju shared the news and left, Qing'er came in from outside and handed Tang Ning an invitation, saying, "Son-in-law, this is from the person who often gives us gifts." Tang Ning opened the invitation and realized that tonight was the dinner party of King Kong. In recent months, King Kong has been very proud and active. Whether it is the people or the court, the public opinion is biased towards him. There is nothing to do in the evening anyway, so it's better to go to Tianrunju for a meal, and then go to Su Mei's place after dinner. Tianrunju. When Tang Ning and Xiaoju came in, King Kong stood up to greet them. "Lord Tang, Captain Xiao, you are here, please sit down." The 2 seats closest to King Kong were reserved for Tang Ning and Xiaoju. Tang Ning had seen most of the other people at the table, but he only knew their names, and didn't know which families they were from. However, King Kang's main supporters were the powerful people in the capital, and it was expected that the families of their parents were not simple. During the banquet, King Kong, as the host, was toasted with a lot of wine. After 3 rounds of wine, King Kong put down his glass and sighed a little depressed. Someone said in surprise, "Your Highness is now in the limelight, has won the support of many court officials, and has surpassed Prince Duan. Why is your Highness sighing?" King Kong filled the cup with wine again and said, "Although I have temporarily gained some advantages, King Duan has not broken his muscles. The Tang family is the backbone. They have many party members in the court, almost all over the 6 tribes. I am the king is far inferior to him." Someone said, "Your Highness, there is no need to worry. The Tang family's gang members have been slowly attracted over the years. Your Highness's reputation in the court is now unparalleled. However, the Tang family and Prince Duan are retreating steadily. The courtiers are all smart people, as long as His Highness is sincere enough, they know what to choose. King Kong thought for a while and said, "What do you mean?" The man said, "Everyone in the world is prosperous. If King Duan can bribe them, so can we. Now that King Duan is in a downturn, it is a good time for His Highness to attract people's hearts. Why don't your Highness allow them to use heavy profits to win a few from the 6 ministries, come here personally and use it for us?" High profit. Upon hearing this, King Kong twitched the corner of his mouth and glanced at Tang Ning with a look of hesitation. The man hurriedly said, "Your Highness, everything you do in this world has to pay a price. If we choose well, we can get back what we invested in the early stage." King Kong thought for a while, seemed to have something on his mind, and said, "In your opinion, who among the 6 tribes should we win over?" The man thought about it carefully and said, "The Ministry of Rights is the back garden of the Tang family. We can't get in. Besides, it's useless to win over the people in the Ministry of Rights. The Ministry of War is all generals. If we can't win them over, we don't dare to win them over. There is no need to win over the Ministry of Justice and the Ministry of Justice. If you want to win over, you still need to win over the Ministry of Personnel and the Ministry of Household Affairs. As long as your Highness can win over a minister, it will be much easier to do things in the future." King Kong knew that it would be a great joy if someone from the Ministry of Personnel and the Ministry of Husband could stand by him, but the real power of the ministers of these 2 departments was still higher than that of other ministers, and how easy it was to win them over. He looked at the man and asked, "Who else can win over the Ministry of Husbandry and the Ministry of Personnel?" "Your Highness, the Fang family has 2 of the 4 ministers of the Ministry of Hubu and the Ministry of Personnel. However, the Fang family has never been involved in party disputes and is not easy to talk to. However, Han Ming, the minister of the Ministry of Hubu, is an excellent target to win over. The Han family is in the capital, does not have a strong background, and he is not from the Duan Wang family. If His Highness can win over him, it will be of great benefit to His Highness's future affairs. This person is a good candidate." King Kong suddenly looked at Tang Ning and asked, "Master Tang is in the Ministry of Revenue now. I wonder if I can have a conversation with this Minister Han." Before Tang Ning could swallow a mouthful of food, King Kong immediately said, "The position of the household department is extraordinary. I can't take action personally. I still need to trouble Mr. Tang. I will prepare a generous gift tomorrow. Mr. Tang can try to win over me first." Minister Han. Tang Ning finally swallowed her food and said, "Your Highness, this." The person who advised King Kong said, "It's just a message. Mr. Tang won't reject it too, right?" Tang Ning looked around and found that everyone was looking at him. King Kong's eyes were full of expectations. If he refused at this moment, there would be no convincing reason, and he would immediately become the target of public criticism. But this matter is still a secret among secrets for the time being, and not a word can be revealed. He drank some water to moisten his throat, looked at King Kong and others, nodded, and said, "Then let me try." Fortunate Young Gentleman. Author, Rong Xiao Rong. Chapter 301. King Kong had obviously been worried about being unavailable among the 6 tribes for a long time. Early the next morning, he ordered people to send a large number of gifts. Judging from the actual power he holds, the weight of a minister of the Ministry of Revenue is more than that of several other ministers. The Ministry of Revenue often deals with money and food. With a little manipulation, the gifts given now will be doubled in the future. But King Kong's plan this time will eventually come to nothing. Not to mention Han Ming, the right minister of Hubu, was originally King Duan's secret son and could not be used by King Kong. Even if he was not, there was no need to win over the minister of Hubu who was about to be Shuanghui. The current Han Ming is actually like a time bomb. It's okay if he doesn't touch it, but whoever touches it will be unlucky. Unfortunately, Kong Wang doesn't understand this truth. Before the bomb explodes, Tang Ning can't reveal anything to Kong Wang. Su Ru looked at several big boxes in the courtyard and asked, "Brother Xiaoning, what should I do with these things?" Tang Ning thought for a while and said, "Carry them all to the warehouse." Xiaoju came over early in the morning and shared his first CB after becoming a man, successfully getting rid of the problem of being unable to get up in the morning. He watched the servants move the boxes to the accounting room and said in surprise, "How dare you steal Prince Kang's things?" Tang Ning opened a few boxes and took a look at them. She shook her head and said, "King Kong still has some good things. The gifts he gave these few times are getting lighter every time. People who are too stingy will rarely achieve great things." Xiaoju looked at him, thought for a moment, and suddenly asked, "Are you hiding something from me?" Tang Ning looked at him, shook her head and said, "The secret must not be revealed." In the early morning, a commoner from the capital pushed open the door and walked out. As soon as he took a step, the sound of horse hooves suddenly came from the front. A group of knights ran wildly through the street in front of him. Although he had to dodge quickly, he was still eaten. A mouthful of dust. On the streets of the capital, a horse was galloping, and the minimum punishment was 20 canes. The man said poof several times, looked up, and said angrily, him, hurry up and get reincarnated." Not long after, in the palace, Emperor Chen held a report in his hand, his face extremely dark. A secret agent knelt on one knee and said loudly, "Your Majesty, I have found out that the tax accounts of Bozhu, Xiangzhou and Weizhou have been falsified for several years. Han Ming, the right minister of the Ministry of Revenue, colluded with the three states. The governor of the state embezzled the tax money and food from the three states, and converted all of it into silver, amounting to more than 2.3 million taels." Emperor Chen slapped his hand on the table and said in a deep voice, "What a good minister of household affairs. I made him the minister of household affairs, not to put the money from the treasury into his own pocket." "Ling Yun," he whispered. Ling Yun came out of the queue and bowed, "I'm here." "Immediately arrest Han Ming, the right minister of the Ministry of Household Affairs, and the three departments of the Yashitai, the Ministry of Punishment, and the Dali Temple will interrogate this case. We must get to the bottom of this case." Chen Huang gritted his teeth and said word by word, "I want to hide the person who is hiding in the palace, find out all those people behind the scenes one by one. Follow your orders." Household Department. It has been 10 years since Tang Ning left, and the household department is still as busy as ever. Ever since His Majesty developed the habit of paying private visits incognito from time to time, there has been little slacking off in the major government offices in the capital. Han Ming, the right servant of the Ministry of Revenue, walked into the duty room and looked at the other table. He was startled. Fang Jie, the left servant, has always been diligent. It has been a while since he went to the Yamen, and he hasn't come yet. It's really strange. Strangeness. He sat down at his table, and after a quarter of an hour, Fang Jie came belatedly. He was holding a paper bag in his hand. After opening it, a human fragrance immediately emitted. He pointed at the pastries in the paper bag, gestured to Han Ming, and asked, "Master Han, would you like some of the pastries made by my daughter?" Han Ming smelled the aroma, pinched a piece of pastry, and after tasting it, he praised, "It's really surprising that Ms. Fang has such skills at such a young age. My daughter is only 18 years old and has never been in the kitchen." While eating the pastries, he praised, "I have tasted all the pastries from Tianrunju, which are famous in the capital. In my opinion, my daughter's craftsmanship is better than those famous chefs from Tianrunju." Fang Jie smiled slightly and said, "I can't eat any more. If Master Han likes to eat, eat more, otherwise I'm afraid it will be wasted." Han Ming smiled and said, "It's not good to waste food. In this case, I won't be polite." He picked up the last piece of pastry and regretted, "It's so delicious, what a pity it would be if I couldn't eat it more often in the future." As soon as he finished speaking, several figures strode in from outside the door. Ling Yun looked at him and said expressionlessly, "By His Majesty's order, Han Ming, the right servant of the Ministry of Revenue, is captured and brought to justice. Mr. Han, come with us." Seeing this, Han Ming's expression changed and he said urgently, "Commander Ling, may I ask what crime I have committed?" "What do you mean?" "Boss Hu, Xiangzhou, we is who," Ling Yun said, looked at him and asked, "Shilang Han, do you want me to continue?" Han Ming was shocked, his face turned pale, and the last cake in his hand fell to the ground. Ling Yun waved his hand and said, "Take it away." The guards behind him rushed forward. "Wait a minute," Han Ming raised his head, as if he was much older, and his voice was even hoarse. After all, he was the right minister of the household department. He had been in a high position for many years and naturally had a certain temperament. Seeing him speak, several guards stopped in their tracks. "There is one piece of pastry left, don't waste it." He picked up the last piece of pastry from the ground, put it to his mouth, blew on it, and slowly put it into his mouth. He looked at Fang Jie, who was standing there and looking at him calmly, turned his head and said, "I will go on my own." Several guards looked at Ling Yun, who raised his hand and followed Han Ming. In Hubyu, when the palace guard came to Hubyu Yamen, many people instinctively sensed the tension in the atmosphere. Then I saw Minister Han walking out of the duty room with an ashen face, and all the guards followed him. Someone finally realized something, with a look of extreme shock on his face. Han Ming slowly walked out of the household department under the gaze of everyone. In half the morning, the fact that Han Ming, the right minister of the Ministry of Finance, was taken away from the Ministry of Household Affairs by the guards, although it was not spread throughout the capital, all the major government offices and high-level mansions got the news immediately. No one knows the reason why Han Ming was taken away yet, but everyone knows that once His Majesty sends out the guards, things will become very serious. Minister Han may be in trouble this time. Ministry of Rights. The teacup in the hand of the Minister of Rights fell to the ground. The official who was delivering the message in the room had never seen the minister so rude before. He stood there, a little at a loss. "You go out first." After an unknown amount of time, Tang Hui spoke slowly. "Yes, sir." As if he had been granted amnesty, the official immediately pushed out and closed the door. In the room, Tang Hui held the hem of his clothes tightly with both hands, his arms shaking uncontrollably. His face, which had always been smooth, revealed extreme disbelief and a trace of deeply hidden fear. What a humming ghost! Xiaoju, who was resting at home in Dingguo Palace, learned the news, got up and cursed in a low voice. Xiaofu looked at his vagina and asked, "Young master, do you still press the button?" "Click here." Xiaoju hurriedly put on his clothes and said, "Go find Tang Ning." Prince Kang's mansion. Han Ming, the Minister of Household Affairs, has been arrested. King Kong, who had just learned the news, was also stunned on the spot and did not speak for a long time. A figure hurriedly walked in from outside. Before he could get closer, he said loudly, "It's not good, it's not good." The man took 3 steps at a time, ran forward, and said anxiously, "Come on, there is news from the Yashitai. It is said that Han Ming, the Minister of Household Affairs, embezzled millions of taels of national tax money during his tenure. Your Majesty has ordered the Ministry of Punishment and Dali to the 3 departments of the temple, and Yashitai will jointly investigate the matter strictly. Han Ming is finished." King Kang's body trembled and he almost fell down. Han Ming embezzled millions of taels of national tax money. It must be a major case with wide implications. And yesterday morning, he asked Tang Ning to give Han Ming a generous gift. Once this matter is found out, what will the courtiers think and what will the father think? King Kang's face turned pale almost instantly, and he said loudly, Hurry, prepare the car, go to Tang Mansion.